Well, of course, next week is Easter, which means today is being celebrated as Palm Sunday in Christian churches. Our faith tradition evolved from liberal Christianity, so some Unitarian Universalist congregations are commemorating it as well. But our Universalist forebears knew God as all-loving, not judgmental. And our Unitarian predecessors taught God as a unity, not a trinity. Those commemorating the narrative, which is found in all four Gospels, typically wave palm branches during the Sunday service, imitating the crowds who greeted Jesus as he entered Jerusalem. I bring up Palm Sunday not just because it's being celebrated today in many of our sibling churches, and as a nod to one of the sources of our living tradition, but because it directly ties into this month's theme of reimagining hope. Those greeting Jesus by waving and laying down palm branches had high hopes for him, his life, and his ministry. Most expected him to be a Messiah who would be a great political and military leader and would free them from the tyranny of the Roman Empire. He had certainly rebuked the religious and political authorities, which made those authorities uneasy about what upheaval lay in store, and of course made him a target. Like many later, they interpreted Jesus' message of standing up for the oppressed and caring for one another by loving and serving them through a solely political lens. Reverend Colin and I spent most of this past week at a retreat for UU ministers from the Southwest congregations. As these things sometimes happen in my life of synchronicity, the final worship service revolved around the theme of hope. The worship leader read part of a compelling work titled "Say Yes" by poet and activist Andrea Gibson. In it, they suggest that for some, hope can be defined like this. When two violins are placed in a room, if a chord on one violin is struck, the other violin will sound the note. Emily Dickinson told us, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. That's lovely and poetic, and I don't know what it means. It reminds me of those clocks they sell on late-night cable television that chirp every 15 minutes and tweet the call of a different North American songbird every hour on the hour. And my only hope is that no one ever gives me one. So the left side of my brain was asking for something a bit less poetic, and so I found that Misters Merriam and Webster told us that to hope is to cherish a desire with anticipation, to want something to happen or be true. So, to use the word in a sentence, for instance, one might say, the church leadership sincerely hopes you have thoughtfully considered your support of the church and that you will soon turn in your pledge card. Just for example. Hope, of course, is crucial in our lives. It can literally be the difference between life and death. You may be familiar with psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl, who spent time in a Nazi concentration camp. According to Frankl, the way a prisoner imagined the future affected their longevity. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he reported that the rate of deaths in the concentration camp increased after Hanukkah, despite no change in the camp's already deplorable conditions. When rumors of release in time for the holiday proved unfounded, the prisoners lost hope. Their immune system gave way, and they succumbed to fatal disease. Hope had kept them alive. But like so many things, hope doesn't have just one facet or even interpretation. There are different ways of thinking about such a universal concept. which is lucky for me since my assignment is to reimagine how we might imagine hope. At the service at the Ministers' Retreat, we actually reflected on the idea of setting aside hope, but the kind of hope that encourages us to simply wish for something to happen, the kind of hope that doesn't ask us to work toward our goals or leads us to believe that good will happen if we are solely and correctly attuned with the holy. I turned on Jeopardy Friday while I was eating lunch. I sometimes do this when I want to see people less than half my age who know more than twice as much as I do. A famous televangelist interrupted the show several times by appearing in brief commercials. Now, I don't want to name names or get too specific, but he regularly appears in a sports arena 4.1 miles from here. Always the words "hope again" appeared on the screen under his $1 million smile and well-rehearsed gestures. These brief interjections of what I consider feel-good platitudes and shallow theology struck me as the epitome of using hope to not wrestle with actual circumstances, nor to hope and work for the benefit of others, but instead to just believe and feel good, instead of working together towards what we hope for. An extended or excess form of optimism that is not grounded in the basis of reality, such as fantasizing or wishful thinking, is not part of what it means to be hopeful, writes Islamic scholar Ustaz Ahmad Newman. He quotes an Egyptian scholar, Dr. Amru al-Wardani, who wrote, "Hope flies with two wings, the wing of guided optimism and the wing of realism." Hope is a key concept in most world religions. Reading about Hinduism, I found that in Vedic philosophy, karma was linked to ritual sacrifices, and hope and success were linked to correct performance of these rituals. But the concept of karma changed over the centuries from sacrificial rituals to actual human action that builds and serves society and human existence. Rabbi Betsy Forrester differentiates between hope and optimism. She writes, "Hope is a challenging spiritual practice. It's not the same thing as optimism, which is a belief that things will work themselves out on their own. Our tradition tends not to be optimistic. Our Bible is anything but optimistic. But it is deeply hopeful." She continues, "Hope is a deeply rooted Jewish practice. In order to hope, we must believe in the possibility of change. We must be able to see ourselves and other people as change agents. Practicing hope requires vulnerability, putting ourselves on the line, taking a risk. Hope requires truth and honesty. False hope only masks anxiety. Real hope is a commitment. Ultimately, hope is an act of faith. A great thing about it, though, is that we can practice hope even when faith is difficult." Her admonition to believe in the possibility of change ties directly to what Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams told us in our second reading. Liberalism holds that the resources that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. End quote. We are given the tools and ability to change things, and that is where our hope lies. The psychologist Charles R. Snyder linked hope to the existence of a goal, combined with a determined plan for reaching that goal. Snyder stressed the link between hope and mental willpower, as well as the need for realistic perception of goals, arguing that the difference between hope and optimism was that the former included practical pathways to an improved future. But back to Jeopardy and my lunch on Friday. The show was again interrupted, but this time by speeches introducing the newest Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Watching this, I was struck by the stark contrast to the previously televised vision and version of hope by the televangelist. During his remarks, President Biden said, "When I made this commitment to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court, I could see this day, because I thought about it for a long, long time. When I decided to run, this was one of the first decisions I made. I could see it as a day of hope, a day of promise, a day of progress, a day when once again the moral arc of the universe, as Barack used to quote all the time, bends a little more towards justice. I knew it wouldn't be easy." End quote. President Biden had the tools and ability to change things and forged that hope, just as we can. Perhaps about less historic things, but only perhaps. Of course, as I remarked 2 weeks ago, President Obama was quoting Dr. King, who was quoting 19th century abolitionist and Unitarian minister Theodore Parker, and Obama even riffed on the quote a bit. "The arc of the universe may bend towards justice," he said, "but it doesn't bend on its own." The moral arc of the universe was also mentioned during that worship service about hope last week at the ministers' retreat. The remark was made that while we often think about that linear arc, our experiences are often more cyclical. The similarity between COVID and the 1918 influenza pandemic 100 years earlier, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the possibility of world war, might cause us to reflect on the cyclical nature of things, and to wonder how or why we would continue to hope that the world will continue to improve, or believe that the arc will continue to bend toward justice. But perhaps even a sense of hope is cyclical. Religious liberals more than 100 years ago believed that humanity was going to just keep on getting better and better, more moral, more generous, more just. But then the world wars were undeniable evidence that people could be as cruel and as hateful as ever. We hadn't progressed as far as we'd imagined or hoped. By the end of the wars, only the most optimistic and prophetic seemed to believe that the timeline and moral arc were indeed bending towards justice. Perhaps we're in a similarly questioning time now. When the difference between the linear metaphor and a cycle metaphor was mentioned during that service, I remembered back to a sermon I preached in Sacramento. I had combined the ideas that while life is cyclical, it doesn't simply repeat itself. I do believe in my heart that it is getting better, sometimes more quickly, sometimes less quickly. I created a metaphor that acknowledges that we seem to repeat patterns in history, but that things aren't entirely circular. While we do repeat patterns and find ourselves responding to the same problems, they're not the exact same experiences. It isn't Groundhog Day. But we are, in some sense, traveling from one end of a line to the other as well. So we are arcing towards justice as well as cycling around. So the metaphor I came up with was a slinky. It is linear in a sense, but things keep swinging back around to a similar place. And if we stretch the slinky out a bit, the arc is long, and it is bending towards justice. But as we swing around, sometimes the levels seem close together, and we're not making a lot of progress. And sometimes they're farther apart, and we really seem to be making some headway. And the fact that it is a spiral reminds us we're not doing this on our own. We can look down at the previous levels and learn from previous experiences. As we read in our second source, we can heed the words and deeds of prophetic women and men which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. And we can inspire those who come after us and are up ahead of us on that spiraling arc. But most of all, we are reminded that we are traveling together and can both get and give hope to one another. As Sir Alec Guinness said in the first reading, at the heart of all things moving forward is the realization that the world, your friends, your own broken heart need your friendship and your laughter and your willingness to go on. Break down and acknowledge your loss, your anger, your diminishing assets, but fall right back on a laugh, a story, a meal. Whatever you can cobble together and give to someone else, to yourself. My sadness has always been, I think, a reminder that in my spell of solitude and serenity, the world was still out there getting beat up. People were in pain. And I need to get back to tending to them. The greatest gift sometimes is the outstretched hand. Jesus, who was welcomed into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, provided hope by preaching. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. I mentioned earlier the poem Say Yes by Andrea Gibson. While I can neither read the entire thing now or give it the passionate and compelling reading that she does, I do want to share an excerpt, and I really encourage you to look up the entire thing on YouTube. She's really quite something. When two violins are placed in a room, if a chord on one violin is struck, the other will sound the note. If this is your definition of hope, this is for you. The ones who know how powerful we are, who know we can sound the music and the people around us simply by playing our own strings. For the ones who sing life into broken wings, open their chests and offer their breath as wind on a still day when nothing seems to be moving. This is for the possibility that guides us and for the possibility still waiting to sing and spread their wings inside us. Because tonight, Saturn is on his knees proposing with all of his 10,000 rings that whatever song we've been singing, we sing even more. The world needs us right now more than it ever has before. Pull your strings. Play every chord. If you're writing letters to the prisoners, start tearing down the bars. If you're handing out flashlights in the dark, start handing out stars. Never go a second hushing the percussion of your heart. Play loud. Play like you know the clouds have left too many people cold and broken, and you're their last chance for sun. Play like there's no time for hoping brighter days will come. Play like the apocalypse is only 4, 3, 2. But you have a drum in your chest that could save us. You have a song like a breath that could raise us, like the sunrise into a dark sky that cries to be blue. Play like you know we won't survive if you don't, but we will if you do. Play like Saturn is on his knees, proposing with all of his 10,000 rings that we give every single breath. This is for saying yes. This is for saying yes. Amen.